Hello.
Hi, how are you?
You may be asking yourself, how could such an esteemed connoisseur of the arts have failed to have played such a prestigious, celebrated, and all-around beloved action franchise like Devil May Cry for so long? And to be honest, my answer to that question is, I don't know. Truth be told, when Devil May Cry released all the way back in 2001, I was, a infant baby, so I haven't exactly been with it since the beginning, but even so, it's always been a series that I've been itching to play through, and since I've had the HD collection sat in my Steam library for way too long at this point, I figured I might as well finally try it, and let me tell you, it was awesome. Right from the get-go, the game comes out swinging. I mean, just look at these opening titles.
Let's rock, baby.
I haven't even seen the main menu yet, and I already know that I'm in for one hell of a ride. And to add to the craziness, this game, if you didn't already know, was originally intended to be Resident Evil, but was reworked because obviously it's nothing like Resident Evil. But despite how far removed it might seem from its roots, the remnants of its original intentions can still be seen. Like Resident Evil, you find yourself in a big ass castle where you're forced to mosey your way through it in order to find items and solve puzzles and other things along the way in order to access new locations. The game's enemies also feel like they're ripped straight out of Resident Evil, with half the castle's halls filled with wandering enemies not too dissimilar from RE's zombies, that for the most part you can just run straight past with little to no effort to get to wherever you want to go. It's easier here though, because unlike Resident Evil, you have infinite ammo. Which lets you smoke everything in your way without mercy. Moving on from its similarities to Resident Evil, I can safely say that besides a few similarities in its game design, the two titles could not be any more different. But what is Devil May Cry about? What is it that sets it apart from its predecessor so much that it had to be reworked entirely? To be honest, I honestly could not tell you what happened during my entire playthrough. It was like a fever dream. The game just kept throwing crazy crap at me with little to no explanation. Sure, I know that I'm supposed to stop Mundus. Great name for an all-powerful evil villain, by the way. Pfft, Mundus. But anyway, it's not that the game is impossible to follow, and to be honest, I'm probably blowing my confusion a little bit out of proportion. But I mean it when I say that the game does very little to keep you in the loop. To begin, we're given a big old monologue about how thousands of years ago the forces of the underworld were defeated by a rogue demon called Sparda during their war with Earth.
But somebody from the underworld woke up to justice and stood up against this legion alone. His name was Sparda.
To be honest, it's pretty bulk standard stuff that if you haven't seen the main menu's opening titles, might make you assume that the rest of the game was going to be a bulk standard generic trope-filled fantasy affair as well. But it doesn't take long for the game to prove you wrong, because immediately after we're thrown into a dimly lit street and given one of the most bananas opening cutscenes I think I've ever seen. This cool blonde lady, Trish, lands in a dimly lit street and makes her way towards a building with the game's title hanging on top of it. Before anything else can happen, we meet our protagonist Dante,
Devil May Cry. Sorry, we closed at 9.
who after telling a potential customer over the phone that they're closed, moans that he can't get any real clients.
Whoa, slow down, babe.
Then, for no reason at all, Trish rides a motorbike through his front door and starts kicking the ever-living shit out of him. Going so far to bust up his desk and throw a sword through his chest. Then, instead of letting the insanity end, she launches her motorbike at him, and Dante is forced to stop it by pumping a gazillion bullets into it.
Time to go to work, guys.
Speaking of which, why did she even have a motorbike? She practically teleported in from the sky, remember? And she was already right outside. Why didn't she just knock? It's hardly like Dante refused to let her in. Unless that was her on the phone, in which case, are you telling me she chose to find a payphone and ring him beforehand? This came out in 2001, so I doubt she just had a chunky mobile phone ready and waiting to go, especially not sandwiched under that outfit. Anyway, instead of being given a hefty bill to cover the damages she caused, Trish instead tells Dante that she's actually looking to hire him. And without so much as a question from Dante, all is forgiven. She tells him that Mundus has returned on some island, and that you have to go there to stop him because you're the son of the legendary Spada. And then, that's it. That's all the setup the game gives you. After that, Trish just jumps off ahead as soon as you get there, and isn't seen again until like halfway through the game. And you're just left to go there alone. Occasionally stopped by the odd cutscene that does even less to tell you anything that's going on. So, right off the bat, I've got to admit, I was surprised. I don't know why, but I had expected the first Devil May Cry to be a lot more story driven. Maybe it's all the memes and other brain rotting things I've seen from the rest of the franchise. But who knows. Instead though, the game kept almost everything intentionally vague. Not so vague that you have to go through every single item description just to find out why the rocks are a certain colour in Dark Souls, but just vague enough to give you a hint of understanding, even while you're sat there for most of the runtime thinking, what the hell is going on? I think the lack of any constant narrative really helps the game, however. There's something about the fact that you can just blitz through its missions without being stopped by a bunch of cutscenes and dialogue that just makes the whole experience that much more addicting. I never felt like I was running out of steam, and when I did happen to close the game in rage on a couple of occasions, I still always found myself quickly booting it back up again, just because I knew that no matter what mission I was on, it would always be a pretty quick and speedy affair. And on the few occasions where I did hit a wall, which were mainly against bosses, it never felt like a drag. I was always excited to go back, always desperate to push forward and see how much wackier things could get. And by the end, after I descended into the underworld, beat Mundus, and heard some of the worst lines in history,
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
I was sat there thinking only one thing. Its crazy story aside though, how does what is a nearly 25-year-old game hold up? Well, I'm happy to report that I had a blast with its gameplay, which to be honest isn't anything too complex. You can shoot from a variety of ranged weapons, whether it's your handguns, ebony and ivory, a shotgun, or my personal favourite, the grenade launcher, as well as a few melee weapon options to mix things up, the lightning sword Alaster, a pair of fire-powered gloves called Ifrit, or the legendary demon-slaying Spada sword, which, to be honest, I didn't use a single time until the final boss. There's also your starter sword, Force Edge, but once you get the other weapons, I found pretty much no point in using it, considering that Alastor is basically just exactly the same, but cooler. Your melee weapons can also be upgraded with a variety of skills, either before you begin a mission or at statues which can be found across the map. Alaster, for example, can be given a piercing attack, Ifrit can shoot fireballs, you know, stuff like that. I, however, never managed to unlock all of these abilities, instead finding myself using the game's red orb currency more often than not on in-game consumables like holy water, which let me deal crazy damage to bosses, yellow orbs to get more continues, blue orbs which extended your health, and purple orbs that upgraded my devil trigger. And since I was more focused on finishing the story, I very rarely stopped to farm red orbs from the common enemies. Despite that though, I never felt like I was missing out. Everything felt approachable regardless of which skills I had, and whilst the game's many bosses and even some of its more common enemies were undoubtedly a struggle more often than not, it never felt like it was because I was underleveled or incapable of passing unless I went off and grinded for hours beforehand. The fights are all just a test of skill, nothing more, and that's a great thing. That being said, I just gotta say, I really hate the way this game handles continues. Now, I know I said that the missions were quick, but whenever I found myself getting absolutely slapped around by a boss only to run out of yellow orbs, you can hopefully understand my frustrations when I found out that I had to restart the entire mission. The first fight with Nilo comes to mind as one of the more annoying examples of this, mainly because failing to beat him forces you to go all the way back and refight another mini-boss before you can get back to him again, only to, well, from my experience, lose again and again. Now, it would be one thing if it was just limited continues tied to the game's currency, but it's the fact that if you fail and use one of your yellow orbs, that the game doesn't even count it as going back to a checkpoint. What really annoys me about this is that if you use any consumables before you die, when you respawn, they'll still be gone, and so will the currency that you use to purchase them. Now, I know that's probably just the game showing its age more than anything, but even then, it still really pushes my buttons. Why even have that system there to begin with? If anything, more times than not, it makes more sense to just straight up reset the game and buy the items again. By the end of my playthrough, it didn't really matter though, as I had more than enough yellow orbs to brute force my way through anything that it threw my way, but it still didn't change how annoyed it made me those few times I used a holy water, for example, only for it to be gone forever because the game would rather steal it from me if I messed up. Look, I'll admit, it's hard to criticize some of its systems, given its age and all, but at the same time, it's hard not to complain. There were so many boss fights that just didn't make any sense to me at first, and as I mentioned, the first Nilo fight nearly had me throwing my desktop at a brick wall and calling it quits forever. Then again, the funny part of that story is that in all the subsequent fights against him, I resorted to just spamming him with melee attacks and winning without issue. I don't want to dwell on my issues with the bosses for too long though, as they're relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, but when you have me fighting against a giant griffin on an obscenely tiny pirate ship while it sends out another bird to use telekinesis and ping pong me all over the place without any warning or obvious counter, then yeah, I'm probably going to get stressy and have some issues about the fight, you know? Turns out though, that the solution to most of the bosses is the same as every other encounter in the game. Fire a million grenades at it until it dies. Which is a cool enough solution, I guess, and you won't find me complaining about that anymore. But despite how messy it could feel at times, the combat never got boring. Its biggest flaw though is definitely the camera. God almighty, I swear the amount of times I was in a fight where I couldn't see what was happening just because of the camera angle drove me insane. Especially during the second fight with Phantom and the third fight with Nightmare. If I had one wish for the sequel, it would be that I hope the camera actively follows the player. This method of changing perspective every time you enter a new room or area may work really well for games like Resident Evil and Metal Gear Solid, but that's only because they're much slower paced and nowhere near as crazy and bombastic on the action front as this. And when I'm jumping around everywhere, swinging a sword and shooting bullets at everything I see, I want to be able to, you know, actually see. Overall though, Devil May Cry is a truly great game, and it deserves every bit of praise it's amassed over the years. It may be dated, but it's timeless, a perfect representation of the period of gaming history it released in. The game itself only has one goal: to get you to the final mission in the most exciting and efficient way possible. Sure, it's got all these upgrades and new moves you can buy for your weapons, and a whole host of secret objectives for you to complete, but the reality is that you actually don't need to unlock or complete any of them. Hell, by the end of my playthrough, I think I'd only purchased about half the abilities for both weapons, and even I got to the end just fine. There might be some times where you're forced to fight the same bosses over and over again, some of which are infinitely more fun to go up against than others. God, I hate you, Nightmare. But like I said, the missions are so quick that even if you lose all of your continues, you can be damn well sure that you'll be right back in the action before you can say,
Devils never cry.
But now that I've finally saved the world from demonic doom once more, and defeated Mundus and his many evil demons, I can safely say that I genuinely am excited to see what comes next. And I can't wait to see how this series progresses going forward, even if some of the games are less than well received. But anyway, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit that bell icon so that you never miss a video. Or just hit dislike if you made it this far, even though you hated it for some reason. Honestly, I don't care, because why would any of you care about my dumb opinions anyway? But, as always, I will see you on the next video.
Okay, great. Where's the place? We'll be right there. This one has the password. Sounds heavy.
Okay, let's get it over with in 10 minutes. Can't let a single one of those suckers live.
5 minutes.
More than enough.
Yo!